All right, welcome back to another edition of our behavior talks. Today's topic is going to be about language, and it's really, language is so complicated, we're just going to stay with the rudimentaries of language. All right, now let's talk a little bit about language. And we're speaking specifically about spoken language. So there's two aspects to language, okay? One is the understanding of language, and that's called receptive language. And then there's creating, producing, saying language. And the ability to do that is called expressive language. All right, so some things to understand about receptive language then. Okay. Receptive language always comes before expressive language. When you have a baby, okay, the toddler is going to understand more than they can say. So us understanding language comes first, and then our ability to produce language comes later. Receptive language is also stronger in that it remains longer when it goes away. It remains longer than expressive language does. All right, so when I was growing up, I moved from China to the US when I was 5 years old. Okay, and both my parents had to work. So, I would go to school and then I come home and I would get nothing but English, like I would get English in school. I would get English when I was watching TV at home. And so my ability to use Chinese started to fade away. So even today, I can understand my parents better than I can talk to them in Chinese, So the receptive language, me understanding it, is stronger than my ability to say it. All right? So now in receptive language, generally in receptive language, you're showing your understanding of the spoken language by doing something. These are some examples of receptive language. So one of the most basic one is being just able to follow instructions. So when somebody says, oh, can you go get me that picture that's hanging on the wall over there? Oh, I show you I understand the language by getting up and completing the task. Object labels, colors, shapes, people, actions, categories, all of these are language concepts. And when you ask somebody to identify something for you, like, oh, touch the water bottle, they know by touching the water bottle that they understand the language that you're using. The thing with receptive language is that, one, you need attention in order to hear the language, right? Because if you don't have the attention there, you're not going to pay attention to what somebody's saying. Just by virtue of not paying attention to it, you're not going to be able to understand or do what somebody wants you to do. You also have to be able to discriminate between similar sounding sounds, similar sounding words, and similar sounding phrases. And receptive language also requires a coordination of your gross and fine motor movements in order to execute the instructions that are given to you. All right. Now, going on to expressive language, like I said, it comes after receptive language develops. And it's quicker to go away than receptive language. What is expected in expressive language then is that they are creating language by saying something. So some examples of expressive language include making any kind of requests. So things like, can I have some water, please? Oh, can I get some extra candy? All of those are part of expressive language. Being able to ask and answer questions. So when we ask someone like, oh, what's your name? Or when we answer, oh, my name is Bob, those are us producing language. The difference between expressive and receptive language for all of these kind of areas is that, oh, the difference between touch water bottle versus somebody asking me, what is it? And I'm telling them water bottle. In one instance, it's about me understanding the language. Oh, when somebody says, oh, touch water bottle, what does that actually mean? Okay, they want me to do this. And I'm performing an action to indicate that I understand the directions. So what does expressive language require? Well, it actually requires a whole different set of conditions than receptive language does. To be able to produce any kind of sounds, any forms, words to create sentences, you have to coordinate a whole lot of movement inside your mouth to produce a wide variety of complex sounds. If you have a hard time moving your mouth or a hard time knowing where your tongue is inside your mouth and how to place your tongue in relationship to the formation of your mouth to produce certain sounds, you're going to have a hard time doing any kind of expressive language. The next thing is about articulation, and articulation is about how well you are forming all the sounds so that somebody else can clearly understand what you're trying to say. This is a major impediment in terms of somebody being able to understand your child, because a lot of times your child may be able to say stuff and people inside the family have learned to understand how and what they're communicating, but nobody else outside is going to be able to understand exactly what they're saying. And so we need to work on the articulation of words and phrases and sounds in order so that everyone can understand what your child is telling them. The last part of it is volume control. Okay, and volume control is just about making sure that the child speaks at a loud enough voice in order to be heard. So a lot of our kids, sometimes they speak too low for most people to be able to hear them, okay? And so we have to actually teach them to be able to control their volume so that they can say it loud enough so that somebody else can hear what they're saying. Now, other kids have the exact opposite problem, okay? Not with volume control, but they speak way too loud. And so they're gonna talk really loud in a lot of different places that might not be appropriate for them to speak that loudly. Those are two aspects to language, right? One is understanding the language and we show how we understand language by doing something. And the expressive language is just spoken language. Oftentimes, kids with autism demonstrate either a delay, meaning that, oh, other kids are here and they are behind where other kids are, or they lack that skill set completely. This is actually really, really important for most people to understand, is that when you're working and trying to teach a child with autism, they have built into them this language deficit, this language delay. And so a lot of people through kind of regular life, they learn like, oh, I'm trying to explain things to a child, and how I'm doing it is through complete use of language. So they rely on a lot of talking to teach a child that doesn't understand very much language concepts that are going to be hard for them to learn. And it happens with like all of our kids, even our kids that are actually well spoken. The thing is, like, sometimes they demonstrate that they understand more language than they actually do. So one of the kids that we worked with, he learned all the social rules about how you're supposed to pay attention, how you're supposed to acknowledge somebody. So if somebody were to go up to this child, like, hey, okay, I need you to do this, blah, 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 and told a bunch of things, our kid would look great. He would be listening to them. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Got it? Yeah. Got it. Wouldn't know anything that you told him to do. Okay. But was really good about understanding the social rules you have to follow when somebody was talking to you. And this would just get him into trouble. Why? Because it would just make his teachers mad because they're like, oh, I told you, you told me you knew it. And then he wouldn't do it. And it's not because he actually didn't want to do it. It was just like the teacher used too much complex language. And he just learned how to navigate the social landscape by looking like you're listening, being attentive, answering, but not really understanding what was being spoken to about. So when we're teaching language to our kids, we always have to make sure that we are not assuming the child knows more than they actually do. Whenever we work with any child, you just have a plan to, we're going to teach everything. Whatever components of language are that there are, we just have to plan to teach those components of language. We train all of our staff on how to be really good about breaking language down into its most basic form so that the child can really understand what we're trying to teach. And then we systematically build that language up to everyday usage level so that then the child can operate in the everyday life. When you're teaching language, traditionally, you always start with receptive language. So you teach the child to understand that language. And then as their ability to articulate, to produce sounds, to do all those kind of things comes into play, then you'll teach the same concept expressively. What we learn to do is we break down all of language into component pieces, and then we're systematically teaching all of those component pieces. And then when they learn each component piece, then we bring those together to tie it into more complex language. When we structure our programming, then our programming has a receptive component and an expressive component. The receptive component targets receptive language, and that is the understanding of language. And the expressive programs target expressive language, which is about the production of that language. We're gonna go through an exercise and show everybody kind of like, okay, well, what do you mean by breaking language down? Like, how do you go about doing it? And so we're gonna go and use actually a very specific example about how we might do that. Well, let's take a look at one specific aspect, component of language, and it's called spatial prepositions. So spatial prepositions are things like in front, on top, next to, or beside, behind, inside. They are all about referencing where something is. We're gonna take a look at teaching spatial prepositions first in the receptive language domain, and then later on we'll take a look at how we might do that in the expressive language domain. First off, when you're taking a look at breaking language down, you have to understand, like, okay, well, what does the everyday language, what does that actually look like so that we have a starting basis for it? In English, when we ask somebody to do something for us, we might say like, hey, Billy, can you please put these keys next to the box? Now, the thing is, in the English language, there's a lot of filler words, words that have no meaning other than to help the construction of the sentence. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take out all the words in there that are unnecessary for the completion of this specific task. So we're going to get rid of that language. And so what we're left with is put key preposition box. Now, remember, we're teaching prepositions because the child doesn't know prepositions. So in this instruction, they still have to pay attention to 3 different aspects: the item that they're getting, the location that they need to put it in, and the reference item. So how we're going to do it is we're going to construct a teaching situation such that we're going to eliminate 2 aspects of the language so that the core concept is being taught. If I give the child an item to put someplace, I don't need to reference that item anymore. And if I only have one item in front of you for you to reference its spatial location, then I don't need to reference that either. When we strip it all down, we went from a very complex set of instructions to very simple instructions, which is just put and the prepositional phrase that we want the child to learn. So typically how we do it is we just start with one preposition, we teach that, and the child can put that item where I asked the child to put it. And then we teach a second item, and then we put the second and the first items, the locations together so that, okay, I can tell you this and then can tell you the other one, and you can still accurately put it in the correct location. We teach the third one and the fourth one, and so we taught all the prepositions in this manner. Now, this is something to remember, right? They have a hard time with language, okay? Which means that when you introduce these prepositions, what you want to be is very calculated in the order that you've chosen to teach these prepositions. The first item that you teach and the second item that you teach, they have to sound as different as they possibly can. So you want to find the 2 prepositions that sound the most dissimilar from each other to teach at the onset. That's what you're doing is, you're making the learning as easy as possible in the beginning. The first one you learn, the second one that you learn, it's going to sound so different from each other that you will not have a hard time telling the difference between the 2. And you want to just keep on doing that by, what's the next one that's so different from these other 2, until you get toward the end. And then at the end is when you work on the hard discriminations, the words that sound similar to each other, because that's when they are going to have the difficult time. So here's a little visual, So we've stripped all the language down and we're just teaching one thing at a time. So let's say that I'm teaching on top, okay? So I'm just going to have one box in there and I'm going to give the child the keys. So I don't need to talk about the box and I don't need to talk about the keys. And I'm just telling the child, put on top, so that the child knows and can learn the preposition. So you do that for every preposition until you can go through and ask the child to put behind, put under, put in front, and they can do all of those instructions. Once they learn that, then you can start to make the language a little bit more complicated. Now that they've learned the preposition, now you're going to add a harder level of discrimination involved, which is now I'm going to reference what you have to put. So now there are 2 pieces of language that they have to put together. Put, what am I putting? The crayon. And where am I putting it? Behind. Now they have to navigate both pieces of information. Whereas before, you only had them pay attention to the preposition until they learned it. Now that they've learned the preposition, you're making the language more complicated and they will be more successful because now they're ready for that increase in language. So here you have to pay attention to the reference. So I'm just going to say, put inside jar. And so the child has to pay attention. What preposition and where do I have relative to the object? Once they get really good at all those steps, then now you can bring all 3 aspects of the language together in one instruction. You can see how we started with one basic concept, taught it until the child learned it. Then we started to add more and more complexity to the language until we can get to this level of complexity. The thing is, we're not even done at that point because we have to make the situation more and more like real life, natural type of situations. We have to get away from sitting at the table in the chair and doing it there. And we have to get it so that, oh, it's all around the house and that the child's able to do all of those things that you ask of them all around their environment. We have to increase the complexity of the language by adding back in the filler words, because that's how everybody else is going to be interacting with your child. And you want them to be able to understand all of the language that is being thrown in their direction. And you are finally done when the child's able to utilize all of the language components that you've taught systematically in your everyday life, so that when you ask the child, oh, to put this somewhere, they know exactly what to do. So when we're talking about expressive prepositions, then we have to think about, oh, under what situations is the child expected to vocally produce language associated with the use of prepositions? We might, in real life situations, like, hey, where's my key? And somebody's going to say, oh, the key's right on top of the box there. Just like in when we're teaching the receptive prepositions, in expressive, we're still going to eliminate the unnecessary components of language. We're going to get rid of the unnecessary filler language first. We're left with key on top of box. The next thing that we do is we have to control the environment. Like I said, oh, we're not going to have a lot of items in the field. We're going to have one item and one reference item in the field. And then that way we can only target the prepositional phrase itself. All we're left with is the preposition itself. And so just like we taught it in receptively, we do the same thing expressively, which is we teach one item, one prepositional phrase at a time until, oh, I can put the item anywhere and they can accurately tell me the prepositional location of that item. So we teach the first one, we teach a second one, we mix the two, they can do it successfully. We teach a third one, we mix it all together, they can do all those fine, and we just systematically teach every preposition phrase until they can clearly say it. Here it is. We put the key someplace, and then we ask the child, where's the key? And they have to tell us accurately where the key is, whether it's inside, in front, under, on top, next to. And until they can do that, we don't worry about the next layer. They have to be really good at this for us to increase the level of difficulty. Once they're good with that, then we can start to make the language more complicated for the child. So when we ask, where's the crayon? Okay, now there's two items that the child has to pay attention to and understand the frame of reference that they're using, so that they have to tell us, oh, it's behind the box. And then you still get more complicated when they're able to do the last step without errors. Now you're adding the item that they have to put in there. So when you say, where's the crayon? They have to say, oh, the crayon is in front. And then we bring it all together so that then, oh, we can ask the child, oh, where's the crayon? They can say the crayon is in front of the box. Where the key is on top of the jar. And again, we don't stop here until we get to the point where they can use these prepositional phrases in everyday life. Hopefully, that helps everybody understand language better, and especially how to break language down to be able to teach it in small, easy to learn pieces, and then how to make it more complex, but in a very systematic fashion. Next week, join us when we talk about one of my favorite programs, and it's called Non-Contingent Teaching. It's by and far the method of teaching that we primarily use when we're teaching our kids. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We really appreciate anything that you have to tell us, good, bad, anything at all. So please always comment. You have suggestions for us. We're happy to take those suggestions. You have things to comment about, things that you want us to cover in the future, put it all there. And of course, if you like what we do, please hit the like button. If you love what we do, please subscribe to our channel. And then we look forward to helping everybody continue their development. Good to see everybody again. Thank you so much. And then I'll see everybody next time. Bye-bye.